It can get lonely climbing Mount McKinley, so to entertain myself, I go to ChumbaCasino.com. At Chumba Casino, I can play hundreds of online casino-style games for free, like online slots, bingo, Slingo, and more. Plus, I get a daily login bonus. It's just too bad that up here, I don't have anyone to share my excitement with. Woohoo!
Live the Chumba life. Anytime, anywhere. Play for free now at ChumbaCasino.com. VGW Group. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Live.
Oh, he don't walk over.
Well, no, I just wanted to make sure we were in a stable state. Didn't realize everybody had different things that came up. But welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Everyday Black Man Podcast, a podcast for authentic black male thoughts. You have your guests here, Mr. Ken. He's going to talk about failed bondsmen in Texas. We also have our normal cohort with the writer, Reed, Sham, Stylish, and of course myself, Riker. Follow us on Twitter, EVYD Black Men, Instagram, Everyday Black Men, and Everyday Black Men Podcast Facebook page. We also have a Patreon, EBMP. You can find all episodes debut there first. We also have exclusive episodes there as well. And last but not least, our website is www.everydayblackmen.com. So,
Start the show.
Let's go ahead and let's start the show. Ken, tell our listeners a little bit more about what you do and who you represent, and we can go into topics from there.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. I would say to start with, I am a father of 2 daughters. I think that's probably the most important thing people should know about me. I'm married to someone who's actually an attorney as well. She's a lot smarter than me. And so I don't get away with any crap because for some reason, I got it into my head, I need to marry a smart woman. I come from a very poor background, but I had 2 public school teachers who taught me the importance of education. And so I went to college. I got a master's degree. I taught high school for a couple of years, and then I went to law school. I went to Texas Tech in Lubbock, Texas, and I became an attorney. I became board certified in civil appellate law. I represented doctors and hospitals when they were getting sued, and sometime I started representing bondsmen, and that morphed into what I do today. I specialize in bail law. I travel the state of Texas, and I've written articles on numerous bail issues across the country. I just had an article published a week or so ago in the Attorney at Law magazine talking about increasing crime and calling into question the FBI statistics on crime because there's other federal government agencies that actually track crime. And what do you know, 9 days after my article, I'm sure it's completely unrelated because nobody knows who I am, but 9 days later, the FBI amended their statistics to show that crime was up and not down. And so I'm not saying I'm prophetic. I'm not saying they changed their statistics because of anything I did. I just thought that the timing was very interesting, an issue that I thought should be something that should be addressed with the public, and it was a growing issue. And then the next thing you know, the FBI is agreeing it's an issue, and they address it and brought their statistics in line with the other federal government agencies that track crime and showed that crime was actually increasing instead of decreasing.
Well, excellent. I know no one likes to be prophetic when it comes to things like that, but certainly we want to have accurate crime statistics. And if the FBI has to amend their stuff, I mean, it kind of reminds me of the jobs numbers from not that long ago.
Was that political?
Well, it's too early. We don't know whether it was political or not. Let's assume it's not political. The FBI changed the way they were gathering their statistics probably 4 or 5 years ago, and so it's been a very bumpy conversion. And police agencies had to bring in additional equipment that was expensive to be able to report to the FBI under the new system. And, I think I even stated in my article, the 2 largest police agencies in the country,
New York and
LA
LA.
and New York City were not even reporting into the system. So how can we even think that they're accurate if the two largest police agencies in the country are not reporting to them? So I think part of it is a conversion problem. And then, anytime one party is quoting police statistics, and that's the only thing that they have to support crime is going down, and that everybody else is just not seeing it. And then when the FBI comes out and amends it, you have to think, well, maybe there was a political element of it at one point. But I mean, there's other explanations that get you to the same result.
Correct, because I remember they were reporting the increase in crime by statistics, like it's 100%, whatever. And I was just like, but we just had a pandemic, so I was just like, is that political? Like that sounded political to me, at
Well,
least
but
in
they
my
were using
opinion.
the FBI statistics to say that crime was going down and that you couldn't believe your eyes when you saw that crime was going up because, there's been I mean, I've been on a debate before on this issue where they were using the FBI crime statistics as their single argument for why crime was going down, and that everything else that you see was not accurate, or that you couldn't believe it because it wasn't the FBI. So all the other things were showing that crime is going up, and especially in our inner cities, especially for our minority communities. And so when you see that the FBI during the middle of an election season changes their crime statistics, and now the new ones show that crime's actually going up. The only piece of evidence they had to show that crime was going down was the old FBI statistics, and now they don't have those.
I have kind of like a link up question to that. So, one is what other databases that are out there that measure crime that are, yeah, and give us kind of like a scope. Is it just federal or is it federal, state, local? And then on top of that, are these other systems, well, actually, let me take a step back. Are these systems using the quote unquote same definition of to what crime is and what variables lead to crime?
Well, I think different federal agencies look at different things. Like the CDC tracks homicides. And so while the FBI statistics before they were amended showed that homicides were going down, the CDC statistics showed that homicides were up 20%. And so I think that's one of them. The DOJ does certain tracking, and I think actually they do a survey of crime. They do it annually. They've been doing it for many, many years. And if you look at that data showed crime was up across the board. If you want to get into the minutia, probably the most accurate data on crime is carjackings, because insurance companies still require a police report before they'll pay off on that insurance claim. And that data is devastating for the people arguing that crime is going down. There's others. You can look at just regional data, like Harris County in Houston had a press conference saying crime is going down. Everybody's doing a great job, and then weeks later they had another press conference where it was disclosed that they had closed 260 something thousand cases, with the notation that they just didn't have enough manpower to investigate all those cases. So it's really easy to say crime is going down when you close 260 something thousand cases.
Without basically, well, there was no resolution to it, right?
No, they were just closed because they said they had a lack of manpower. So, if you
Mm.
want to talk about politics, that guy, the city police chief ended up losing his job over that. And really I think the whole reason why we're having this argument is because these, what I would call bad bail reform things that we've tried in our urban areas, like in New York and also in LA, have been devastating, and they've been devastating because crime has increased. And the argument against that has always been, well, no, crime hasn't been increasing; it's been going down. And so now that argument has kind of been decimated, and they don't even have the argument that crime is going down. And so you would expect, if we're all politicians that are just looking after the best interests of the community, then you would say, okay, what we've been trying is not working. We need to try something new. New York has now rolled back their bail reform statute 3 times. And it looks like it's the number one issue in New York for this election as well. And there's a couple of seats I would say that the House of Representatives in the federal government is controlled by the Republicans right now, because 2 years ago, crime was a major issue and it determined multiple races in New York. And it looks like it's going to do that again this election cycle, because they still have not resolved the rising crime issue.
Interesting, interesting. Definitely, I like looking at the statistics from both sides. And if we don't have the statistics that everyone is utilizing, then that really is pretty damning for the evidence. Is there anything that the proponents of cash bail reform are going into outside of citing this one statistic that's been kind of disproven?
Well, you can look at a lot of things, and let's just take California in a nutshell. So, a decade ago, they passed Proposition 47, and the argument was we're going to reclassify certain felonies as misdemeanors, and that's going to include theft under $950. And the argument was these people, whoever they are still going to have to respond. They're still going to have to uh, get. They'll still be punished for the crimes they commit, but But now, since it's a misdemeanor, not a felony, they'll be able to get jobs. But then, in our inner cities, in our urban areas, we have prosecutors in California that decided they were no longer going to prosecute theft under $950 once it was lowered to a misdemeanor. And as a result, you can see over the last decade what's happened. Shoplifting has taken off. Stores have closed because they can't withstand $25,000 a day in shoplifting. And then, then then it becomes a much worse situation because look, it starts to affect the tax base. You see commercial properties nosediving in their values. You see the Nancy Pelosi federal building in San Francisco where they told federal workers to no longer come to the office, work from home because it's not safe. You've got buildings that are selling for 30 to 50% of their value from just 2 or 3 years ago. And Minneapolis and Minnesota, it's not California, but it has similar issues because it's the urban area. There's two buildings there that just sold for 9% of their value from the last time they sold. Commercial default rates have gone from 5%. Now they're at 41%. So you can see a direct correlation of bad bail reform measures, increasing crime, having a devastating effect on public safety. And if we don't want to call it crime anymore because we're not prosecuting it, it's still a public safety issue. If mom and dad or grandma and grandpa can no longer go to the CVS pharmacy or the Walgreens on the corner, and now they have to take public transport for 30 minutes or longer to get their medications to go to the local grocery store, then that raises public safety issues. I mean, you can see it also. Let's just go to Portland, Oregon, where they decriminalized all heavy drugs. The argument was if we will do that, then finally people will seek counseling. They'll go into rehab because there's no criminal penalty. Well, what happened? The criminal penalties just expired. I mean, the setting aside the criminal penalties just expired. They did not renew them because the result has been so devastating on the public. Drug use has gone from 6% to 12%. People are overdosing. We're setting records on overdosing every month. And the programs they set up for rehab and drug abuse counseling, only 0.01% of people were actually reaching out to use them. So it just confirms what we've been saying all along. You have to have the hammer of threatening to send somebody to jail if they are unwilling to go to rehab. And we have to have that hammer every time because rehab has a 75% failure rate. So we have to have an incentive for people to keep going back until they decide they would rather be off drugs.
Can I ask you a question though?
Yeah, sure.
Um, isn't something to be said about the fact that our laws have taken away the rights of citizens who are trying to protect themselves in general? Right. Even if you look at what happened in Portland, Oregon, right? Portland, Oregon is mostly a Democrat place, and they're not high on people protecting themselves, right? So yes, everybody can have the right to do whatever drugs they want, but if somebody tries to break my house, I should be able to defend myself properly with no obligation to the law. But
Well,
we're putting
I
these.
think you and I agree on that but let
Okay.
me go back to your argument about, no one should have the right to, take these drugs. I think I disagree with you. The people that were pushing for these reforms, I think that was going to be their next argument. You have a right to OD if you want to. You and I, as reasonable people, would say no. As a society, we can't sanction overdose as a right for the community. We need to be standing up that you can't do that. On your other argument about the government is preventing people from protecting themselves, that's an argument I use a lot. I'm like, if the government is not going to protect me, then at the very least, the government should allow me to have a gun so I can protect myself. I mean, that just seems like common sense. But in a lot of
Understandable, but well, hold
these
on.
areas, that's not what happens.
To your first point, though, sorry to cut you off. I
No
do.
problem.
I don't feel like it's unreasonable to say if you want to OD, you can, because people can eat as many sandwiches they want and cause themselves heart failure if they want to, right? I'm a libertarian, so my views may be a little bit obscure to most people, but I honestly feel that people should have body autonomy. If you want to do something to your body, you're fine to do it as long as it doesn't affect me. When you start affecting me is when we have a problem, right? So I my argument against for the drugs is that we allow people to become morbidly obese. That affects our system in many ways, right? Heart failure, it puts a strain
Okay,
on
but
our
how do we
healthcare
affect,
system.
but what does the government do on policies on obesity? They set up things to encourage people to lose weight. And so we
But I don't
can't
think it's
have
the
a
government's place
policy.
to do that, though. I honestly
Well,
don't think it's the government's place to do
We're
that.
getting away from the subject.
Okay,
okay,
I'm
I
sorry.
agree with you, Art, but let me just finish this thought. So
Yeah.
the government has limitations on everything, and the biggest limitation on what the government can do is money. Things that pushing people, the policies for people to be more healthy is so the government spends less money on healthcare. The whole policy for having, let's don't do drugs. You don't have a right to have to OD. So if you OD, does the government have an obligation to bring you back with Narcan? That's the whole point. Are we going to then spend the limited resources that we have on spending all of our resources bringing you back after you exercise your right to OD? That's the whole concept of where money comes into play. We have limited resources, and we don't realize how much those limited resources affect policies across the spectrum, and they should
You know,
be
and
should be affecting our bail policies as well.
I agree with you,
So
but I
I
think
have a
our
question
bail
about policy.
policies.
Go ahead.
Oh, my bad.
So
Well, our bail policies will be lower if we allow people to have individual rights. That's where I think
I
we're
don't agree
missing the
with
mark.
that, because you can look at Portland, Oregon, and see that that's absolutely not true.
Right. And I was gonna say too, like I mean, these, the so-called rights or whatever, they do have costs, like everything does. Like that's what we, that's easily what we do at government. Like you just have to balance those the cost versus the benefit of doing anything.
so um my question is when it comes to the bail bonds, Ken, you're saying that because they or some states like the liberal states, either California or New York, when they roll back on their bail bonds, so basically shortening the net so it doesn't catch as much people or more people can go through the net and come back in society, it's increasing the crime rates or yeah, it's increasing the crime rates or keeping them high. And we need to actually morally broaden the net so that we can bring more people into jail and have more reform so that we lower crime. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's a very a different argument than that. I mean, what I
Okay.
think what the public does not realize is, like in New York and California, in our urban areas where they're doing what I call bad bail reform, is uh, they're doing a charge-based release system. So we're just releasing people on their promise that they'll come back without having to put up any collateral or any security. Like in New York, we call it release on no bond. In California, we release it on zero bond. In Texas, where they do it, where when it is granted, it's released on a personal bond. So, but they're all the same thing. We're releasing someone on their promise that they will return. Like in New York, they made a list of crimes, and on those crimes, the judge has no discretion but has to release somebody on no bond. So they just are released on their promise. The problem is that's true no matter how many times they commit that crime, like catalytic converter theft. I mean, we would probably all agree it's a low-level crime, but the problem is if you've done it once, there's one thing. If you've done it 10 times, it's another thing. If you've done it 20 times, it's another thing, because as a result of these policies, organized crime has learned how to make thousands of dollars on each catalytic converter that has been stolen. And so you're giving an incentive when you use these policies, which are just to immediate release somebody because of the charge that they were arrested for, without looking at their criminal history, without looking at any of those other things to see if, hey, maybe this is a continuing problem. It just is a green light to commit more crime, and the system can't. The system can't handle this. The system gets overloaded with cases. That puts pressure on them to de facto dismiss, to dismiss the cases because they just have so many. And dismissal is de facto decriminalization. Decriminalization is a green light to commit more crime. That's what we're seeing across our urban areas.
So, what my understanding is basically someone goes and commits a crime, goes to court, judge goes, okay, you've done this, so you're gonna go to the bail and go through the bail process, and the bail process says basically, on your word, you'll come back and make sure that you're good. But that person goes out, does the same thing, see the judge again, and the judge is like, well, I don't have any power to do anything. So your last case is dismissed. This is dismissed, and you just go back out there and keep doing the same thing.
No,
Is
no, no, no,
that
no,
how
no,
I'm
no,
getting?
I'm not
no.
saying your
That's not what
last
happened.
case is dismissed, but I'm saying you keep getting arrested for the same crime. They can't hold you. So
Okay.
without these type of policies, if you got arrested 3 times for the same crime, the judge would say, "Well, I'm not going to release you again because you're just going to go do it again." There's a public safety element, but we're tying the hands of our judges so that they can't use their discretion, and that these policies are being perceived as a green light to commit more crime.
So how
And
do we, like moving forward? Because in the politics is a part of it, but at the same time, too, at the end of the day, when it comes to truly resolving all of these issues, laws need to be put in place. So what laws would you recommend that would help create a solution for this problem?
Well, the problems that we have is that we have a separation of powers between the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch. So,
Hmm.
you're really kind of advocating that the legislative branch is going to tell the judicial branch how to run its system. Uh, and so there's limitations on what can be done. There are cases where statutes get held unconstitutional all the time because they have violated the separation of powers. But where we're seeing it happen is, where we're taking away the judge's discretion on setting bail, the statutes can say what the judge has to take into consideration. And so when we're saying if it's a charge-based release, no matter how many times you've been arrested for this charge, if you get arrested again for this charge, you will be released. That's a problem. In New York, they've made it where the judges can't consider dangerousness of the defendant in setting bail. So we have these, I would say, just ludicrous things that we're tying the hands of the judges behind their back so that they can't do their job, which is they already know what to do. And you've already mentioned politics. Politics is kind of always an issue, but it's become a huge issue on these criminal justice reform issues and on bail reform issues. And I know, the audience that I'm talking to, but we could spend another hour on talking about whether we have a systemic racist system in place or not, which obviously I do not believe that we do.
Let me ask you this though. Okay, let's say we get rid of cash bail, right? But if it wasn't for cash bail, me being who I am, I would have spent more time in jail than I needed to, right? This is coming from a person who's experienced cash bail systems. Let me ask
But
you
here,
this. Well, no,
okay, wait,
well, let me get to my
go ahead,
question.
go ahead,
If
go ahead.
on the cash bail system, right, with a judge, these judges are slow. The court system is slow. So there's another side to this that we're not speaking about, right? Where we say, hey, someone's sitting in jail for a minor crime for 2 years, right? That shouldn't ever happen. But it does happen, and it did happen in our previous system, where people have sat in jail for minor crimes and lost their whole life as if they did something they didn't do, right? Because the amount of time they spend in jail, the amount of life they lost compared to what they would have lost in reality because of the slow judicial system that we have in America cost this person years of their life that they shouldn't have ever lost, right? And there's those kind of errors that we make and malfunctions we have in our system. Or let's even say someone's innocent of a crime, there's no cash bail, and they're sitting for jail for something they didn't do, right? And my personal philosophy is if one innocent man has to suffer then our system is broken. Not saying that your point is wrong, that our cash bail system isn't working. What I am saying is that our system in whole may need to be looked at entirely, because there's a whole other side of this when it comes to judicial justice, how long people sit in the terms they serve, and how it affects their personal life for crimes. And I agree, there are people who abuse these systems, but I also want to point the fact that our judicial system abuses citizens of this country consistently. And we don't know where the middle is in figuring this out, right? Because there
Let
are
me let
extreme
me make a
fans in this
let me
country.
make a couple of points on this. I'm not. Let me quote from a News Nation town hall. There was a mayor who was a former judge on there talking about the private surety bail system. So this is coming from, and she was a mayor of an inner city, so she was somebody that would be like-minded with probably most of you all. And this was her point. She says, look, if you don't have an alternative to the private industry bail system that has the same high level of accountability, which means people go to court, and the same low failure to appear rate, because everything else has a high failure to appear rate. So until you get an alternative to that, you don't have an alternative. It's not like we like the private surety bail system. I understand that, we're easy targets. But the reason why the private surety bail system has been around for 200 years is because it does one thing, and it does it very well. It gets people to go to court. Now, on your point about the courts are slow, let's look at bail in Texas. In bail in Texas, since it's the job of the judge to determine bail, and it's reviewed on abuse of discretion standard, the trade-off is you can file a motion to reconsider bail at any time. You can file multiple motions to reconsider bail, and the Texas statutes have limitations, like on low-level crimes. You can't keep them in jail longer than a certain period of time, a certain period for a misdemeanor, a certain period for a felony. And then I would just come back to you and just say, we want to put everything in a little cookie cutter for the criminal justice system. And the problem is, and I think a lot of people arguing, the advocates for change are too, but I think what everybody doesn't realize is the criminal justice system is meant to be very individualized. It is intended that we are only going to apply the least amount of pressure to you to get you to reform and become a productive citizen. So what that is for me on a first-time offender, or what that is for me as a 10-time offender, is two different things. And I think that we lose track of that. And I do agree. We need to review the system, do a system-wide review. Do we really want this to be a crime anymore? Because we're really doing a lot of damage to our criminal justice system when one county is prosecuting this crime, and then you go to the next county and someone's not prosecuting that crime, and suddenly the public doesn't know who to believe. But I don't think that we should be setting up policies that cause the whole system to fail and cause public safety to be called into question. I don't think that, and I think that's what's happening. We're trying out things that have never been done before, have not been shown to work, and when we start having data that says this is causing crime to increase, then the only thing we hear is crime is not increasing, you're just wrong, is perception over reality. And look at the FBI statistics until this week. The FBI came out and said, well, they didn't even say it, they just changed them, and that has been all over the national news this week. So the question is, like, to your point, how do we provide public safety, and how do we do that?
Well, yeah, I think that's a good point for a Black Libertarian to pick up from. Like, what are some possible alternatives and some compromises that we can do to bridge between the different opinions that we have here?
Yeah, but I would say getting rid of law enforcement is not an alternative. Getting
I
rid
don't
of
think we
our hard criminal laws is not an alternative. We've shown that with the defund the police movement, and because I think every jurisdiction has refunded and has increased, but we've also shown on the drug movement in Oregon that has been an absolute failure, and they have admitted it, and they've allowed the statutes to lapse. So we know what works. We've been told for 3 or 4 years, let's try this something else, and we have, and it has been a failure. So the big shock is we've done this before. We're committing the same mistakes we've made in the 60s. In the 60s, we were feeling safe. We were more forgiving on our criminal laws. And what do you know? Crime went up. the politicians couldn't decide on how to address it. One side of the spectrum refused to be engaged, and so we had a backlash. And in 1980, Reagan took office with his war on drugs. I think we're just committing the same cycle right now, but the pendulum has swung much further to the left, which means that when it swings back, and I think it's in the process of doing so, it'll swing much further to the right. And I keep telling my friends on the left, y'all do not even realize that you're being the catalyst for causing the pendulum to swing so hard to the right, because you're not willing to recognize that there's a problem. You're not willing to help address the problem.
Oh, so I want to say that, to answer your question, I do think there is a problem, but I do not think that the problem is in a vacuum. I think that there are a lot of factors that lead to these problems. Partly the economy, right? If we go back and look in the past, when the economy became horrible, when it was harder for people to get jobs, when it was harder for people to obtain wealth, crime skyrocketed, right? So we can't say in a vacuum, oh, well, this one thing is why. We can say it contributed, but we can't say this is why, right? So to answer your question will be very difficult. But one of the things I do believe would help it would move back to community enforcement. Smaller communities, smaller enforcement. They have satellite police stations that are more community involved, right? If you look at the city of Atlanta, that's where I live. The police stations and the people, the police, the jails, it's a disconnect. It's a total disconnect from community to government to how we govern to how we police our neighborhoods and our environments. And as long as that disconnect exists, we will continue to see crime skyrocket, right? And that's why I'm very big on providing individual responsibility for crimes and protection. Not to say that we need to get rid of the police, not to say that we need to get rid of the government, but, and I know this is going to sound like a joke, and I'm not trying to make a joke, but I do like to use extremities to prove my point. In Georgia, in Atlanta, if the city of Atlanta, if I put a bear trap in my yard, whatever it is, I can't do that. I can go to jail, right? If we do not allow people to fortify and protect their homes, their neighborhoods, and their communities, then we're asking for crime. We're asking for problems. If I don't feel like the government has my back as a homeowner to protect my home, my children, my wife, my family, my cousins, my sister, my brother, then how can I feel safe if I can only wait to call the police? And they're so burdened, right, by these changes that the government makes, by these little micro laws that cause all of this congestion in the court system and for policing, then what am I to do? Right? At some point, we're human.
Actually, what you're saying is what gives me hope in the criminal justice reform movement, because what we're doing right now is not sustainable. The public,
Right.
if so, I mean, Mayor Adams in New York, he's got his own problems right now, but I heard him on a podcast recently, and he was just under attack from the far left about what he was doing in New York. And he was saying, look, one of the foundations of society is public safety. And if you can't provide public safety, then you don't have a society. I agree with that. And so I agree. What you're saying is what gives me hope, because what we're doing right now is not sustainable. And since it's not sustainable, the public, the very people you're talking about, are the ones that are going to demand change. I mean, who would have thought in the last year the NAACP in Oakland issued a open letter to all the local elected officials attacking them, saying we need a state of emergency on crime in Oakland. And they were attacked. They were attacked by the sitting DA, saying you're just using Republican talking points. And the regional NAACP came out and said, we agree with the local NAACP. Crime is a problem. It's epidemic, and we have to address crime. And that's the problem right now. When you've got the LA of California, the LADA, when his office is saying, well, we just have a disagreement on who the real victim is. We think the victim is the real victim is the defendant, not the person who had the crime committed on them. Well, that's a problem, because in the criminal justice system, there's several things like, the reason why it's important that the defendant not run is because his case can't move forward if he's not there. We have to wait for them to come back, except in limited situations. And if there's nobody, if the DA is not in there being the voice for the victim, then there's nobody in the courtroom arguing or giving the court the perspective of the victim. And that's one of the problems that we have right now in California. And that's why in November, this Proposition 47, which was a decade ago, it's again on the ballot for major rollback, and it's expected to win. And the DA, Gascon, he's also on the ballot to be defeated. He only got 25% of the vote in the primary, and because he made it to the last round because of the way they do it, but he's expected to lose big. So, I mean, the public is the one coming into saying, okay, we gave these a try. These didn't work. We know how to address public safety. We know how to address crime, and we need to go back to some of those things that we know that work.
Hey, so my question is, this is my problem, and it's always been my problem with the left and pretty much the right. They always have these large opinions on how these quote unquote neighborhoods should be fixed. And I'm like, you guys don't live here. You don't like where's the community involvement with the people local to who, is actually happening the crime, besides just talking to a business, because they can just close their doors today. These people who actually live here, typically they live here 1-2 generations and they stay there. So like, where's the aspect of community involvement in actually making laws that suit that place where they live versus a larger opinion of like some guy
I
who in
agree with
New York don't know
I
anything
agree
about
with
my
some
city.
of the I agree with some of the things you're saying because
Yeah.
we are now in a period where nobody can agree on anything. I mean, we don't have somebody saying, "Hey, we have to have law enforcement." I mean, we have to have law enforcement to have public safety. We don't have that anymore in our urban areas. And we have, anytime there's an election, anybody that loses, well, the election was stolen. I mean, the
Right.
Supreme Court issues a ruling that you don't like. Well, the Supreme Court it's not a valid institution. It's lost its luster. I mean,
Yeah,
I
but that's
remember,
that's
I
poppycock.
remember a time, I remember a time when somebody would come out with an important ruling. The political leaders would say, well, we disagree with it, but you know what? We're here to respect the jury's decision. We respect the decision of the court of appeals. We don't do that anymore. And so, that's part of the problem with the bail reform movement is, the private surety bail system is an easy target. They're the low hanging fruit. Everybody would like to change to something else. There's just not anything else that works. And as we've seen over the last few years, like New York enacted reform, they have now rolled it back 3 different times. And it just wasn't a couple of months apart. It was 3 different annual years because they did it in their budget. And so that's recognition that it's not working and it's been rolled back, and it still has further rollbacks to go because they still won't allow the trial court judges to consider the dangerousness of the defendant in allowing or determining whether he should be released on bail. What they've done is taken this long list of charges that the trial court no longer has any discretion on, and they've made it smaller and a smaller and smaller list. But on the opposite side, we're still continuing to make felonies misdemeanors. And so we have a lot of crimes that were used to be felonies that are now misdemeanors. And then, I mean, if you have an 80% failure to appear rate in misdemeanor court in California, then, and on top of that, they have the Speedy Trial Act, which means if you don't show up and you don't come back, after a certain period of time, the case has to be dismissed because of the Speedy Trial Act. Then that system is being polluted, and we need to clean it up.
Yeah, I definitely
But
would
it
agree
also
with you
seems
there.
like something.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let me see. So everything's been nationalized and it's not been like that's what I heard. Like everything's nationalized. Like that's so
No,
interesting.
no, no, no. I mean,
Like
the federal government has its own system of bail, and then every state has their own system of bail. That's the reason why in New York they call it release on no bond. In California they release it on zero bond. They call it that. And in Texas they would call it release on a personal bond because every state uses their own system. But the federal system, I mean, there's good examples of the extremes between the two. In the federal system, we reformed that 25 years ago during Reagan's administration. At the time, they were only holding 25% of the people arrested until trial. Well, as a result of the reforms and change over time, that percentage now is 75% of people arrested in the federal system are detained until they go to trial. The only reason why that's okay is that is functional is because the federal government isn't the main source of prosecuting crime in the United States. It's the states. But the states can't pay for they can't afford to detain 75% of the people arrested, and that could never happen. And so that's, but the problem is when the pendulum swings to the far right this time, that's going to be the argument. We need to just detain people. And that's when, people will not, just like they're not going to allow people to commit crime to increase and where they don't feel safe, they're not going to allow the government to hold 75% of the people arrested at the state level. And so we have to find the middle ground, what works, and the private surety bail system is a crucial part of that infrastructure. Because it does one thing. It gets people to court. It gets cases so they're not delayed. It gets people so victims can get justice. If you want to wonder why cases take so long, it's because people don't show up for court. And if they don't show up for court, their case is put on hold.
Okay. All right. No, I definitely agree with you there. We need to find something that's closer to the middle. And also some way of making sure that states aren't being held accountable for the federal government deciding that they want to try someone, because we see just kind of on a national level how that goes. And to hear from you, Ken, about the costs on the states, that's not sustainable, especially during a time where states like Georgia, we're doing a pretty good job of running a pretty efficient budget and making sure that we're within the numbers that we need to be. Whereas some of our other states like California and Texas, or not Texas, California, New York, are running at deficits for an increased period of time, and it's not fair on the other states for them to put that on us. But Sham, I think you had a direction that you were going to go with this.
Oh, well, not really a direction, more of a maybe getting not necessarily away from the point, but anyway. So if the larger issue, or I guess I want to address the pendulum,
Sure.
as that seems to be how things work in most facets in America. Typically, you have one side, the other side. One side gets their way for a little while, goes too far, and then backlash. Same thing happens in the opposite, swing back and forth. Are there any agencies or people who consider themselves proponent of trying to bridge said gap? Since if one side gets their way completely, we always eventually face an issue, seemingly no matter what the actual subject matter is.
Sure, and those groups are called moderates. But the problem is, for the last 10, 15 years, we have put, we have run off moderates. We've also at the national level in Congress, we got rid of the, we have a requirement that you have to have a certain number of people support something, or they can keep it from coming to the floor. They can keep it from voting if you don't have a certain amount of votes. And
filibuster.
Yeah, so we got rid of the filibuster. We originally got rid of it on limited things, and we probably still have it on a few issues. But when getting rid of the filibuster has done great damage to the country, because we no longer, the filibuster forced moderation, because you couldn't get your extreme position through. They couldn't get their extreme position through. The only thing that could get through was something in the middle. And once it passed, the next when the White House changed sides or the Congress changed sides, there wasn't this push to undo anything. Now we're living in this time where, we have Obama. After his 8 years, we have Trump. He spent his first year undoing as much of what Obama did as he could. Then we have Biden. He spent the first probably 2 weeks undoing everything he could that Trump did. And so if Trump wins, he will spend the first couple of weeks undoing everything he can. We no longer live in this time where we work together. And the reason why is because we've gotten rid of the filibuster. We now, to raise money, like Texas is the best example of where we've lost the middle. Texas has always been a conservative state. Even when it was under Democrat control, it was a conservative state. But the problem is the Democrat Party didn't have room for conservatives anymore. And so Texas is now a conservative Republican state. For statewide office, a Republican generally wins by 13 points. And so the Democrats could win Texas. Allred is a good example. He has said he's a moderate. The problem is to raise money for a statewide race in Texas, you have to go to the big money donors in the Democrat Party, and to get their support, you have to state positions that then make you not able to win a statewide race in Texas. Look at Allred. He has supported some bills, and he's done some things that Cruz is highlighting, and there's been commentators that said, in their last debate, Cruz crushed him. It doesn't mean he crushed him on policy. I mean, it didn't crush him as a person. He crushed him on Texas policy. Texas is by and large a conservative state, and he's pointed out that Allred has taken positions that would be repulsive to a conservative state. And so that's kind of where we are nationally. We need to find the middle ground, but we have to set up an infrastructure that will support the middle candidates, because we're taking them out one at a time almost every election cycle.
I don't see that happening because I think when I was growing up, they had blue dogs. They're gone. And then like now, what they call them, the rhinos that are the quote unquote moderates to some extent. Some of them are moderates. They're pretty much going to be
Well, what
knocked out by
we
the
now,
MAGA
for
crowd.
some reason, we call a bill that it's supported by everybody when one person from the other party supports it. That is not a bipartisan bill. I mean, but
That's a
somehow
joke.
under 2024, if you get one vote from the other party, which is the last moderate, suddenly it's a bipartisan bill.
When did
I
that start?
remember, when did that start? That's a good
Was it
question.
Bush? You think maybe
Uh,
Bush years? Or
And
It's
maybe
probably no, even, during Bush, we
was
still
before
had
then.
a large contingent, and I would say it's newer than Reagan, because if you remember,
Okay.
we had the Iran-Contra scandal during Reagan, and how
I
he
read
finally
about it.
got
I don't
through that.
remember it.
How he finally got out of that was just having a press conference and apologizing for it. I mean, if you
Yeah.
were to do that today, then they would say that that's an
You're
admission that
weak.
you did it and you're
Yeah.
weak and you need to be
Yeah.
impeached because you admitted it yourself. So we're always gunning for the other party, and I think that's also chasing off moderate candidates. Why would look? I would probably. I think I have the mindset to be a politician, but I have a wife who is very private, and she doesn't
Yes.
like groups and doesn't like crowds, and I love her to death. I would not want to do anything that would make her uncomfortable. And so, you chase off the moderates, and I have two girls, and they would just be mad if somebody said something really hurtful to me about me in public, and it was all over the news. I know that that's part of politics, but
Right.
it chases off the moderates. It chases off people that we probably should be pursuing or asking to be in our government.
Because I remember it was like even the guys I think that are like super progressive, like someone like AOC, but over time they seem to all go to like the middle, the middle of wherever that party stands at the moment. But I thought she was going to be real different. But as time went by, she's pretty much like your standard your standard liberal, in my opinion.
Well, standard liberal is pretty far right now, because you would, Texas would classify her as further left than Pelosi, and so, but I wouldn't even say don't even look at what she says, what she posts
Okay,
on social media. Just look at
correct.
what has she passed. I don't think she's passed anything,
No,
and
she
so
goes
she's
along
kind
with
of
whatever
good.
they tell her to do. Because
No, she's
yeah,
not.
her
Is she
being a
just a lightning
progressive,
rod, or is she really a problem solver? I would say that
no, she's bought off.
the by and large, most from both extremes, the parties are not looking for solutions; they're looking for headlines. And so,
That's it.
when that's the way you're governing, it
Thanks.
makes it very difficult to find solutions.
I don't think neither one of them care about solutions. I think they like the status quo and a little change here and a little change there. Not well.
I
They
don't.
say they okay. It depends on what it is. I guess we have to go like individualized. But as far as criminal justice, I agree it swung too far to the left because that's where we were at, and that it's too far to the left. And like you said, the people who live in those neighborhoods, they don't listen to them. They'll how do I say this? There'll be some person who doesn't even live there and just like it's going to be better for you, and then they live in there and they're like, People are getting murdered and
Well,
getting out the next
okay,
day. Like,
what you're saying there, I think, is the most important thing that has probably been said today, because we're pushing reforms that really the DA in LA County is saying, well, I'm doing this because I'm helping the criminal. And let's just look at murder statistics. 50% of all murdered people in the United States are young black males. But by and large, the people who kill them are also young black males. So for some reason in this bail reform movement, we've decided to favor the murderer over the victim, over the person who's dead. And we're setting up policies that's kind of like a revolving door, that's a green light to commit more crime. And where are these policies? Where are they hurting the public more than anyone else? In those very same minority communities. Because when
they don't
crime
live
goes
there. They
up,
don't care.
it goes up faster in those communities. But the problem is, when the politicians will not acknowledge that what is going on is hurting those very communities, and they're not willing to try anything else, that's when you know politics have gone too far.
Yeah, but that's
Yeah.
some criminally. Yeah, that's on the left. But I mean, I don't know. I don't think there's a perfect solution. As you said, go back to where we were, but there's problems there as well. So, but it's
Well,
never
we're
going to be a
always looking
perfect
for
system.
ways to improve the criminal justice system. When I'm saying go back, we teach in our colleges criminology. We teach, here's what we have to do to lower crime. And we have a perfect case, which is a good example during all this chaos. There's a case called Sanchez versus Alabama, I believe. And that was a case where they had to live under one of these temporary injunctions, preliminary injunctions, for like 4 years, and they couldn't hold anybody in jail because the court was saying, "Oh, well, they have a right to be released. It doesn't matter if they say they can't afford. You have to release them." Well, in the end, the case was reversed, and so I did a podcast with the sheriff, and he said, "Look, we came back, we re-implemented a system of accountability, and we made it clear to criminals, if you don't show up for court, you will be held accountable and you will not be released again without a strong explanation for why you didn't show up." And within about 6 months, crime started decreasing. So, I mean, it's going to take a lot of hard work, but we know how to lower crime. Part of it's a mindset. And we have to all work together. But, when our minority communities are getting hurt by crime increasing by a great amount, they have to recognize that we have to have law enforcement and we have to have the criminal justice system. Yes, we're always looking out for ways to improve it. And it's not perfect, but it's the best one in the world, I think. And so I do think we need to go back to what we know works and continue to try to improve it.
Okay, so I have a question here though. So I know on the campaign trail, like this is a very popular topic though about like immigration.
Sure.
So in your studies, though, like, have you seen like a huge increase in like crime from like uh, what should I call it? Um, eh, Illegal aliens or just migrants? I'm not sure what to use
Yes,
the
we're
proper
seeing
term.
that across the United States, and I would say the immigration policy goes hand in hand with the criminal justice reform policies. I mean, those are the policies that have been set up were knee-jerk reactions. I mean, if you remember when Biden took office, he immediately, with a pen, changed all of or got rid of all of Trump's policies on immigration. Opened up, he had a stay in Mexico policy, so that if you're request for asylum was denied, you weren't in the United States, you were in Mexico, so you got released back to Mexico, you weren't in the United States. And so we opened this floodgate, and I mean, he took all a lot of what was being used to build a wall, and he just sold it off as scrap metal, and so opened up this but let's set aside the drugs that were coming in. I mean, I did a podcast that I haven't even released yet, where we have this legal drug trade now in certain states, mostly over marijuana. But the problem is the cartels are coming in and they're taking over our national, remote areas of our national parks, and they're just setting up operations, and they're taking over marijuana business in that state. I mean, they would say, the article that I talked to the reporter said, the legal drug trade has failed. I mean, yeah, the legal drug industry has failed. It's being taken over by the illegal drug trade, and with the open borders policy, they're bringing in their own workers, and they're not scared about it anymore because we've decriminalized marijuana. And so now the government, if they make in $300 million on illegal marijuana, they're spending a huge sum of it to try to ferret out the illegal operations that are now in the United States. And those come in with a lot of crime. I mean, because it's from the cartels. And we're seeing that. It's not just the Mexican cartels. We have Chinese cartels. We have Russian cartels. I mean, and, I posted a link to the story, and it was immediately taken down by Facebook because I guess because of the election. We are not allowed to talk about cartels or anything like that, and their impact on immigration policy and crime. Trump mentioned something about gangs taking over apartment complexes, and he was just attacked even by the moderators. And then in the days after, and now all these videos are coming out where these gangs were taking over the apartment complexes and renting them out, so you're paying rent to them and not to the owner of the building. And the government is telling the owners of the building that they're trying to figure out what to do. So yeah, I think it's a substantial problem, and those two policies are hand in hand causing problems with public safety.
Okay, so you would say, like, again, Donald Trump and the Republicans, they're not exaggerating on the issue of the crime with migrants.
No, I would say they're not. In my opinion, I don't believe it's an overstated problem. And what's made me say that is after the debate, when he was attacked, I mean, all these videos started coming out, and then the owners started coming out, and then we have this interview with ABC between the vice presidential candidate, and he's like, and she's trying to scold him. Oh, they say it's only a handful of apartment complexes. And he's like, are you listening to yourself? When in the United States has it been ever been okay for gangs to take over a handful of apartments in the United States, and they're theirs now? I mean, no, that's a big problem. And that's a problem that we're having across the country, not on just gangs taking over apartment complexes, but squatters. For some reason, we enacted some laws to protect squatters, and I know we did it during the pandemic, but the pandemic is over, and now it's a cottage industry in California where if you leave your house for a little period of time, someone comes in and squats it, and you end up having to pay them $20,000 to get them to leave because the laws have been set up to protect them.
Yeah, that definitely is a related issue, especially with squatters. But I want to be respectful to your time, Ken. I know that you stayed a little bit later since we started a little bit later. But is there anything that if someone wants to know more or if they want to find out more information that you wanted to share? I mean, if you want, we can share the information we have that was presented on you, but I'll let you take it away.
Well, sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here today. I love to have intelligent conversations, and I don't mind to be challenged. I don't even mind to be yelled at a little bit, as long as I'm not being told, that I'm just an idiot. I like to have arguments. I like to be challenged on debates, but if people want to know more information about me or my organization, you can go to pbtx.com, the Professional Bondsmen of Texas.com. We have a blog where we highlight important news on the criminal justice front, and we also have our own podcast where I talk about just criminal justice issues. So if somebody wants to know what the New Jersey plan is, we have a podcast just about that. If you want to know about charitable bail funds and why some state organizations are looking to limit them, we have multiple podcasts about that. And so we try to educate lawmakers and the public about these types of issues. And just like I'm here today to try to do that, thank you very much for having me.
Well, you're certainly welcome, Ken. It's been a pleasure. And thanks you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming to another episode of Everyday Black Men Podcast, a podcast with authentic Black male thoughts. We had our special guest, Ken, on here. Definitely check out the website, especially if you want to know more. You may want to do it after the election season, because I know people are getting heated, but he's, presented an argument. He's not trying to make it about any political opinion. You, of course, can find our website at www.everydayblackmen.com. Our Facebook is the same, and our Patreon is EBMP at patreon.com. Thanks again. Peace.
And thank you for coming in. That was a very
Hey, it's Ryan Seacrest. Life comes at you fast, which is why it's important to find some time to relax. A little you time. Enter Chumba Casino. With no download required, you can jump on anytime, anywhere for the chance to redeem some serious prizes. So treat yourself with Chumba Casino and play over 100 online casino-style games, all for free. Go to ChumbaCasino.com to collect your free welcome bonus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply.